What's up guys, Belle's back here, and today I am coming at you with a video about the difference between visual, product, UX design. What is the difference between graphic design, being an interaction designer, an animator, and all the different questions you might have about the areas that relate to UX design. So to provide context, I studied design and business at the University of Michigan, and I also am currently working as a UX designer at a tech company in the Silicon Valley. So the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I think it would help a lot of people who are struggling to understand the difference between an interaction designer, a product designer, a UX designer. Is there a difference? Or being a visual designer, a graphic designer, and maybe which field could be right for you depending on your skill set and your interests. Before diving deep into this video, I wanted to make sure I was well researched and wanted to see what other people are thinking about these different topics and how they vary with salary. I found a couple articles that I will link in the down bar below so that you can see what I looked at to kind of form my own idea, and also just from my own industry experience and experience at school. So the first term that we can kind of go over is just what being a product designer or UX designer is like. I personally believe that a product designer and a UX designer are somewhat similar. I think of the terms as being synonymous with each other. Some people may disagree, but for myself, when I was applying to a bunch of different jobs, a product designer and a UX designer had the same job description, so I opened up the search to both product design and UX design positions. I like to think of a product designer or a UX designer as someone who is really in charge of the entire user experience, meaning a lot of the visual design, interaction design, and being obsessed with the customer, understanding usability concepts, and working with UX researchers to make sure that all of your designs are validated. Validated meaning that you have data to support all the design decisions that you're making. A lot of UX design centers around the way the product is organized, owning the entire app experience or experience for the user for an entire flow, and making sure that the information architecture and the way that everything is aligned and organized on the app makes sense to the user and is not only functional but also pleasing and an aesthetic experience. So a lot of people get confused between a UX designer or a UI designer, and they say that they know what a UX designer is because they know what UI is. Yes, they are similar and you would work with similar people on a project, but they are different. So a UI designer is really working on things like navigation buttons, the ways that things are communicated to users in more of a visual manner. It's kind of confusing, but a UI designer kind of touches on a lot of the visual elements like a visual designer would, but they want to make sure that what the user sees is going to be an aesthetically pleasing experience. They want a lot of these features to be very easily accessible, easy to navigate, and they don't want the user spending a lot of time trying to figure out what these small little actions are doing, and it should be pretty intuitive for the user. I like to think of UI designers designing the individual elements. However, a UX designer would kind of bring these elements to life to create an entire journey or experience. Interaction design can be a little bit different. So interaction design can involve sound, motion, animation, anything aesthetic too. It's really about creating an experience for the user between the product and the customer. There's a lot of overlap between a UX designer and an interaction designer. At my job, I am a UX designer, product designer, and an interaction designer all built in one. We have visual designers and we have content designers, which are basically people who work on the text and the language and the way that things look and are presented and communicated to the user. So as an interaction designer and product designer and UX designer, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to make the best experience for the user. That includes the way that things animate on a screen, the sounds that they make when an action is triggered, etc. Design really will make it so that you have a beautiful interaction design or experience for the user so that it is one seamless interaction. So I brought up graphic design earlier in the topics of this video, but relating to UX design, I would say that graphic designers and visual designers do a similar role, but a visual designer is more UX related. So a visual designer will focus more on text, iconography, branding even, and I think it's really important often that a visual designer has some type of branding background. Often you see people moving from a branding or marketing role into a more visual design role if they had some sort of graphic design background as well. The visual designers at my company at least focus a lot on making sure that the experiences between different suites of products within the company all look somewhat similar to create a cohesive brand image, and that the colors, the fonts, the way that things animate, the navigation elements, everything is somewhat consistent so that people can tell that all the different products are from the same suite of products from the same umbrella company. Beyond these other elements, visual designers can focus on things like the background of a page, textures, white space, how things should be organized visually, and making sure that this is consistent. So now the question is, which design field is for you? If you are unsure, this is what I will say. Typically, a UX designer and a product designer and an interaction designer, I'd say, make a similar amount of money. I think this can range a lot depending on where you live, the cost of living, but at least from what I know, UX designers or product designers can really make between $75,000 to about $140,000 starting salary. Now, $140,000 is obviously at the highest range, I think, for a entry-level job, but this can really grow, especially if you're going between companies and if you are moving up within a company. I've seen a lot of people increase their salaries in these roles to up in the 200s for income, so it is a more lucrative role, and I think that a lot of people sleep on UX designers and always think that software engineers are where the money is in being an engineer, but you can actually make a good amount of money by being a designer. And I think that it's an awesome career for people who are motivated and really want to do something creative, but are also a little bit more analytical and want to understand the user from a psychological standpoint, maybe have a little bit of a coding background, etc. I think a lot of people think that in order to be a UX designer you have to know coding. That's definitely not true, but I will say the people that you are communicating with on a daily basis are often developers and product managers as a UX or product designer. So I have taken about 4 or 5 coding classes, however I've never coded once in my job. I think it's important that you are able to communicate your ideas effectively to developers, and sometimes knowing a little bit of coding can be helpful in some of those communication barriers when communicating between a developer and a designer and the way that our brains work. So that is when I think coding can be helpful, if you know a few languages and just how a product is really built in that way, but you don't need to code. I will say that if you are a very creative person and you've done a lot of graphic design, I think that visual design is an awesome way to get your foot in the door with tech if you are trying to kind of switch from more of a marketing role into a technical role, and you're still doing something like branding, but you're working on the actual product instead of just the marketing materials. I'm also aware that visual designers and graphic designers make a bit less money, and UI designers as well. I believe the range is about from like 50,000 to maybe 70 to 80,000. So I could be wrong here. I will put some screenshots of what I have found regarding this information, but this is what I have seen, and a lot of people I know who were in graphic design before often want to take a UX bootcamp or get a degree in user experience or product design so that they can increase their salary, just because it is quite a difference. And I think that a degree or doing one of those boot camps is really going to supplement your education if you are trying to do UX design. I didn't touch on all types of designers that work with UX designers. There's also, I mentioned content designers, but there's also sound designers, animation designers. So there's a lot more that I could talk about, but I know that this video would be really long, and I also don't know everything. So I hope that that was interesting and useful for any of you who are trying to decide between any of these kind of creative tech roles. And if you guys have any more questions or any other video ideas that you want me to make regarding UX, please leave them in the comments down below, and I will see you guys sooner or later. Cheers!